Im Januar war ich in Jerusalem und habe an der Hebrew University unterrichtet. 2 Kurse für palästinensische und israelische Studierende. Die ganzen Widersprüche, die ganzen Probleme und Herausforderungen dieser Region, dieses Landes, Israel und Palästinas, die sieht man dort auf dem Campus, auf engem Raum zusammengefasst. Die Uni wurde mal gegründet aus dem Gedanken heraus, dass dort verschiedene Menschen verschiedener Konfession, verschiedener Herkunft miteinander lernen und studieren und leben sollen. Und so ist es noch heute, allerdings unter den Widersprüchen, die diese Region im Moment zu zerreißen drohen und den Schicksalsschlägen, die diese Menschen in den letzten Jahren erlebt haben. Man sieht dort junge israelische Reservisten, einige von ihnen werden in Gaza gekämpft haben, in Uniform, teilweise mit Maschinengewehren, neben den jungen palästinensischen Studierenden im gleichen Klassenraum, im gleichen Kursraum sitzen und lernen und arbeiten. Ich war allerdings natürlich nicht nur an der Universität, sondern bin viel gereist, war in Israel unterwegs, war in Palästina unterwegs, bin mit Aktivisten, wie sie sich selber nennen, in die Westbank gefahren, wo sie versuchen, die Gewalt der israelischen Siedler, der radikalen israelischen Siedler gegen die palästinensischen Schäfer zu stoppen, zumindest zu dokumentieren und darauf aufmerksam zu machen. All das sind besondere Erfahrungen gewesen und ich habe die ganze Zeit überlegt, wie ich diese Erfahrungen in Deutschland vermitteln kann. Denn es ist ja, obwohl ich jetzt lange da war, irgendwie unangemessen, dass ich jetzt als großer Israel-Erklärer auftrete. Und es ist erst recht unangemessen, wenn ein ehemaliger deutscher Politiker den Israelis erklärt, wie sie zu sein haben, oder den Palästinensern erklärt, wie sie zu sein haben. Umgekehrt wurde mir immer wieder von beiden Seiten der Wunsch zugetragen, darüber zu reden, über die Schwierigkeiten des Zusammenlebens zu reden und sie nicht alleine zu lassen. Denn das passiert, so jedenfalls wird es dort wahrgenommen, dass sich Europa und Deutschland zunehmend in einer Sprachlosigkeit zurückzieht und sich nicht mehr aktiv einmischt. Und so erleben wir es ja auch, wenn wir ehrlich sind, in Deutschland, dass sich die Debatte immer wieder und immer weiter verhärtet. Entweder ist man quasi bedingungslos für Israel, inklusive seiner rechtsradikalen Regierung, inklusive der innenpolitischen Drangsalierungen, die sie machen, der Justizreform und inklusive der Kriegsverbrechen in Gaza. Und wenn man sie in Frage stellt, dann ist man gleich ein Antisemit. Oder man ist für die palästinensische Seite, verschweigt oder übersieht die Mordtaten der Hamas und die endet dann am Ende bei der Infragestellung des Staates Israels. Beides sind am Ende unhaltbare Positionen, aber der Raum zum Diskurs und zum Gespräch, der wird eben immer enger in beiden Ländern. Und ich habe jetzt vielleicht einen Weg gefunden, wie man ein bisschen das aufbrechen kann, nämlich meine Veranstaltung beim Berliner Ensemble. Ihr wisst, dass ich dort eine Matinee habe und jetzt habe ich 2 tolle Frauen eingeladen. Die Palästinenserin Rula Hardal, die in Ramallah an der Universität lehrt und die Co-Direktorin einer Initiative ist, A Land for All. Und die Israelin oder amerikanische Israelin Dahlia Scheindlin, die diese Initiative unterstützt. Sie ist eine Politikwissenschaftlerin, die in Tel Aviv lebt und die schon viele israelische politische Kampagnen analysiert und begleitet hat. Diese beiden Frauen habe ich am Sonntag, dem 14.02. zum Gespräch gehabt. Das Gespräch ist auf Englisch und es war besonders eindringlich und besonders intensiv, weil es anders, als es so häufig ist, einen Weg nach vorne gezeigt hat. Ich möchte euch herzlich bitten, reinzuhören, vielleicht das Gespräch sich anzuhören und Menschen wie Rula und Dahlia, die Israelis, die Palästinenser, die für eine bessere Zukunft in ihrer Region arbeiten, nicht alleine zu lassen. Dankeschön. Danke fürs Zuhören. Vielen Dank und einen schönen guten Nachmittag, der dann ja zu einem Abend wird. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, danke, dass Sie gekommen sind. I switch now over to English. I hope you're prepared for this. This discussion will go in English. If you don't understand English, then you have a real problem tonight. Please welcome with me, with a very warm applause, Rula Hardal and Dahlia Scheindlin from Israel and Palestine. So, Rula, how is life in Ramallah? I mean, we, the Germans, we hear a lot about the politics of Israel and maybe the strikes from Iran. And before we come to this, how does daily life is in Ramallah? Is it like you're discussing politics all the time, or is the normal day taken over?
Well, good evening, and thank you for the invitation. And I'm happy to be here. And I came from Munich. And
I mean, this is in two ways problematic. First, because I said you only came to us.
Sorry, I'm too honest.
And in Berlin, we don't like to hear that you come from Munich.
I know. And I could fly from Tel Aviv, because I have Israeli citizenship and German as well. So, to your question, no, we don't discuss politics all the time. We don't speak about the war all the time and about our fears and in Ramallah and all over in Palestine. There's still normal life. You were there.
Yeah, we met in Ramallah.
There is also good normal life. The same as when I'm in Tel Aviv. My office is also in Tel Aviv, another office in Jerusalem, and people still have normal life, but life changed in Ramallah immediately after October 7th in maybe two main aspects. The very immediate physical aspect on the ground, that the 300 checkpoints that are distributed in the West Bank, not only in Ramallah, on October 8th became 950 checkpoints. It means even some of the places we don't have a checkpoint, we have a gate. The Israeli army closed some small towns, villages, and people cannot go out. And so when you are in Ramallah, you have quite a good life and normal life, except of the normal problems of administration problems or economy and so on. But when you try to go out from Ramallah, you notice that you are in a very small jail. And the second main aspect, very quickly, is the emotional level. People live under fear in Ramallah and all over the West Bank that something is going to happen. From the Israeli side.
So later on, we will show a map of Jerusalem and the West Bank so that you have kind of orientation. Ramallah is how many? 20 kilometers north of Jerusalem, something like this. So it's a very short distance. And the area around Ramallah belongs to the Palestine territories, but they are controlled by the Israeli army. Ramallah is Area A, right? Exactly. This is controlled by the Palestine authorities, the Fatah, basically. Yeah. And outside, most of the parts are Area C, which officially belong to the Palestine people, but are run and controlled by the Israeli army. And this means you have to even show your passport, or you're controlled when you leave Ramallah into Area C as well?
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's only the town where you can move freely and uncontrolled.
Yeah, and sometimes you cannot move because the soldiers decide to close it for a couple of hours.
Can you explain to us how the Palestine authorities, the Fatah in Ramallah, and the Israeli army are cooperating, or are they cooperating? Are they consider themselves as enemies? Or when I was in Ramallah, I saw a lot of police cars, now Palestine police cars, and but a lot. So more than Berlin, actually, and heavy weaponized, I would say. So it felt also like there's a pressure from, at least they watch out, maybe to say the least. How's the relationship?
I know that they are still cooperating because according to the Oslo agreements, there is a mechanism of cooperation and collaboration between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli army and the Israeli authorities for security issues. And we know that they still cooperate, regardless of the whole conversation in the media. But this is not actually the problem. They cooperate, but they cooperate under a very superior relationship and power dynamics between the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and the Israeli authorities. The Palestinians have no space to decide or to impact the situation in terms of security in the West Bank, where they have to have the control. But those who have the authority and the decision-making are the Israelis. And that's why there is a lot of critique on the PA for continuing this security collaboration between them.
It's been a while since there were elections in Ramallah and in the Palestine territories, maybe for reasons, but I know it's now 15 years ago or so, something like this, that you... 20?
20.
Okay. But there will be elections in Jerusalem, in Israel this year. Same question to you, Dahlia. How is life in Tel Aviv, as this was now, before we come to A Land for All and your initiative, this was the main target of the Iran missiles when they, and also from Hezbollah, from Lebanon, and as long as they could, also from Hamas. So has the, how do you call it, the vibe, the feeling in the city has changed after the 7th of October?
Yeah, first of all, I also want to thank you for hosting us, and thank you to everybody for joining us and for bearing with my English. It has changed enormously. I think that after October 7th, it was like a different world. I actually was away on October 7th. I came back 3 days later to a city and a country that I didn't even recognize. Empty streets, heavily armed security personnel driving around, and everybody afraid to move. Now, it changed from this very acute situation in the beginning when we had, rocket attacks almost every day, really, and sometimes, many times more than once a day in the first number of months. And so people simply didn't go out. We had been in a phase of massive demonstrations before that, so there was even a heightened energy for about a year. Everything had to stop. In the first few months, the shock, the depression, the loss, everybody seemed to know somebody, so everybody was busy going to funerals. Now, that certainly transformed over time. And then you got to a phase where if people wanted to, after about mid-2020, early 2024, when there was not as much rocket fire, people started going out again, little by little. Never to the same level that Tel Aviv, in particular, Tel Aviv is a very energetic city. People like to go out. It never quite returned to that vibe, as you put it. But people who wanted to could try not to think about it to the extent possible. And so when we thought about what is our personal experience, during this time, in a way you could feel in Tel Aviv almost like normal. But if you noticed, stores were closed earlier, restaurants were not open as much. Your normal daily rhythm isn't the same because there was not enough human resources. People were in the army. And if you ever left Tel Aviv to visit the south, you could easily go and visit the kibbutzim that some of them have been really just destroyed. And it's still shocking to go to a little tree-lined street in the middle of a kibbutz like Be'eri, when I went a few days after October 7th, and it looks like apocalyptic. Everything is gray because it's all been, burned and charred and cars are crushed. And if you go to the south, to the area north of Gaza, you have a lookout point where you can look into Gaza and see what used to be Beit Hanun, which looks like rubble, just rubble. You can see that with your eyes. So it really became a choice of how people wanted to feel. Never mind, I think nobody really felt good for the last 2 years, but it was a matter of choice how much you really tried to cope with it and see it day in, day out. And some people chose not to if they didn't have to, because everybody ultimately did have to cope with the fact that they knew somebody either serving in the army or in danger or killed or trauma from October 7th. So it was always there. It's just a matter of what you saw on the surface. Now, then we had Iran, where Iran was a complete otherworldly experience. You could never go out of your house or office for more than a few meters without checking that you're close to a shelter. This wasn't like you could take it or leave it. You had to be in preferably a deep underground shelter. You know, a few blocks away from my neighborhood, the street is completely destroyed. Even today, they haven't rebuilt. So this was really life and death. And then and then Iran was over and everybody got depressed. Why was everybody depressed after the Iran war was over? Because we were supposed to feel like, great, the war is over. But the war in Gaza was still going on, and nothing was back to normal. But I should also be very honest that for the most part, daily life in Israel, even for the people who were really always thinking about the hostages and demonstrating to end the war, because they thought the war had no longer a military justification and was holding back a hostage deal, the vast majority of Israelis were not there demonstrating or hoping for an end to the war because they were thinking about Palestinians. They were not, for the most part.
So for me, and maybe I'm not the right one to judge it, but it seemed that Israel as a whole, I mean, I was mainly in Jerusalem, has really changed and became more religious, at least Jerusalem in the past maybe 2 or 3 years. Last time I was there privately, it's like 3 years ago, more authoritarian, and a lot of secular, liberal Israelis, I would say, which in the language of the acting government are lefties, left wings, just because they don't agree with the government. They are really thinking of leaving Israel. So I was asked, like every time I was asked, how's life in Berlin? And from Jewish people, from Israeli people, because they thought about leaving Israel if things are going south in Israel. And on the other hand, I experienced in my small discussions how traumatized the society still is. I give you one example, and maybe you can translate it in a more political analysis. I was in the West Bank traveling with some activists who try to, in a way, protect the Palestine shepherds there. Everything, I think, between Israel and Palestine is, if you look deeper into it, really, really complicated. But what's going on in the West Bank is not complicated at all. This is just injustice, and it's terrorism, what's happening there. Radical Israeli settlers, basically young men, 18 years old young men, are bullying the Palestine shepherds out, and what these activists are trying to do is basically filming, recording what is going on there and make it public in a way. So, and these are really horrible things. And I came back and met some friends, Israeli friends, and said, okay, I'd like to talk with you about that. And they said to me, and they are the good ones, like these are open-minded people. They said, Robert, we can't do this. We don't have any capacity. Yes, I guess you're right. It's really bad what's going on the West Bank. But look, our children are still playing hostages. Or they feel it. When a brother is not to be found anywhere because he's hiding, then the other brother is really has a breakdown in a way because he's thinking, is he now a hostage? They play Iranian missile attack. They hide under the table or maybe under whatever they hide about. So it's everywhere, the feeling that you have so much to do with your own life and overcome the traumas that you don't have any political strength to go into a political debate for the better. This is just 2 incidents of my personal experience, but you are doing deep analysis about the Palestine society and the Israeli society. What does the data tell us or you?
Thank you. Because I do public opinion research, I have the great privilege of seeing all of the aspects within Israeli society, within Palestinian society, and they are not monolithic. So I would say one thing that is important to keep in mind is that when you ask how October 7th changed either Israeli or Palestinian society, actually it didn't reverse course. It's not like they completely transformed. Because for years already, Israeli society was becoming more right-wing in their self-definition, in their positions on the issues, in their declining support for a two-state solution, and very, very sharply declining perception that the other side believes or wants peace. That was a mutual process of Israelis and Palestinians seeing each other in the worst, most harsh and frankly dehumanized way, very mutually. It's not a mutual conflict, right? It's an asymmetrical conflict politically because Israel is much stronger, but in terms of how the public sees each other, this was a parallel process going on for years I would say the last 10, 15 years have been very negative in terms of people's perceptions of each other and support for peace as a result, because they don't believe in each other. And so October 7th made it worse.
Yeah. So people, you mean Palestine people?
Yes.
Or in an Israeli society?
No, I mean Palestinians also in
so it's
West Bank and
moving
Gaza.
apart.
Yes. Well, they're mutually seeing each other very negatively for years. And then October 7th happens, which one might say is the culmination of years of these very dehumanizing views of one another, and lack of belief that there is any way to achieve anything in terms of your political aims other than force. And on the one hand, October 7th grows out of this perception, and on the other hand, it makes it worse, because each side now responds and says, oh, now we need to use more force than ever before. And so, yes, you're correct that Israeli society has become more hardline, but it was already quite hardline before that. And I would say, when you say, do people not have the energy to focus on what's happening in the West Bank, I think that, first of all, for a very long time, the majority of Israelis, and this I can say about the full majority, 80% roughly, simply did not really pay attention to the West Bank or Gaza, except for the Palestinian citizens of Israel, Arabs who are citizens in Israel, and the left-wing, people who are defined by their
activists.
Yeah. And they did not pay attention to it, partly because they did not believe there could be a resolution, partly because of this lack of trust and sort of dehumanized views. And because their political leaders since, let's say roughly since Prime Minister Netanyahu took power again in 2009, has led increasingly extreme rhetoric from him and his party and his coalition partners, all saying there can be no compromise, no peace. I mean, this is what I'm paraphrasing. Never trust these people, never give up land. I mean, to the point where we didn't even have to talk about it anymore. It was simply clear that Israel would never, give up compromise or give up land. And so people simply stopped paying attention in a way. And that, after October 7th, everybody had to pay attention to Gaza. And then those who were critical of anything directed their criticism at the government. And so remember, we had almost a year of endless protests every single week against the government. After October 7th, the same people thought the government was responsible for the failures of October 7th and the failure to get the hostages back. And so, no, they were not, first of all, focused on the West Bank. They're, first of all, focused on getting Netanyahu, first of all, getting the hostages back, right? Trying to lobby the government, protest against the government's, at that time, unwillingness to reach a deal to release the hostages and have a ceasefire. And if anything, they're trying to transform it into the same critical of Netanyahu and his governments, and try to convince people to vote for somebody else next time. But this also has the effect of pinpointing all of the problems of the country on Netanyahu, which is what many Israelis think, right? A majority of Israelis are against Netanyahu right now, ever since the new government was formed in let's say early 2023. The majority of Israelis, 55%, let's say, disagree with him on everything and won't vote for him in surveys, at least in surveys. I'm not predicting what happens in the elections. But that's because they've come to believe that everything going wrong is purely because of Netanyahu and his extremist governments, which, if we really want to dig deep, I would argue we have to go much further back. The occupation did not start with Netanyahu. Israel's unresolved questions did not start with Netanyahu.
So, Rula, before we come to a solution, you describe... There's one. There is one. But I have to be honest, this is... For me, this is an important afternoon, and thanks for doing this. But we have to be honest, this is a minority position, and I would say a minority inside the minority. Every European politician and every German is always talking about a two-state solution. No one is talking about it in Israel. No one is not true, but the majority not. And if, then they mean separation. So divide the people and build a wall, maybe, or whatever they have in mind, and your approach is very different. But well, tell us about the approach, Rula. You are the co-director of an initiative called Land for All. What is it about? Even the title is pure provocation after what Dahlia just said. And still you are both sitting here, two an Israeli and a Palestine-Israeli woman promoting an idea of a land for all. Is it like, I don't know, it's night and we talk about the coming daylight? Something like, do you feel, why are you doing this and what is it about?
So before I start answering this question, I do want to say something about the Israeli society. And I agree with every word that Dahlia said, analyzing the situation. It didn't start with Netanyahu and it didn't start after October 7th. They just got used not to see the Palestinians, not to speak about the occupation. No political party and no political leader in Israel even spoke in its political campaign. And I do remember, I was one time obsessive a couple of years ago when we have 5 elections in 3 years, something like that in Israel. I checked all the political agendas of all political parties in Israel over a period of time. They just stopped in the last maybe 15 years, at least, speaking about the occupation. So we cannot, things didn't start with October 7th. And I'm not underestimating the brutality of the attacks of October 7th. But we need to remember that Israel is occupying another people and another country that is recognized by the majority of the countries in the world. And we cannot expect to be in this position of being an occupier. And the whole mentality is around security and military aspects. And to expect that this country is going to continue being democratic. And you cannot also expect that people on both sides, when they are distinct from each other and they live in this mentality that they don't care about the Palestinians, they can have normal life. And the Palestinians continue living under this very brutal system of control, to expect from them to continue believing in peace and to be quiet and accept the continuous occupation. So having said all of that, we start actually advocating for this approach from the very basic acknowledgement that we need to re-emphasize, to raise the situation that we are living in. We cannot continue like that. I would say even much more. Something is not functioning in this whole situation, in Israel and in Palestine, in both, without doing symmetry between both, and without even doing symmetry when we speak about any solution and when we analyze the whole situation. And even using the word or the concept conflict, I don't like it because it's not a conflict. On the ground, we have a fact. We have the Israeli state that actually controls the Palestinian people and deny from them their very basic collective right of self-determination.
Just to make it more concrete, and I think this is now a good time. We have prepared 2 maps, one of Jerusalem and one of the West Bank. Can we show the map of the West Bank, please? And so I think you are familiar with how Israel and Palestine look in general. So this is like the shape of the country. So this is not a map of Gaza Strip and not of the whole region, but this just to make it clear what we're talking about, or maybe you should explain it then. But you talked about, when you first described life in Ramallah, about the normal life in Ramallah. When you now say it's unacceptable and a lot of violence is used, it's not Ramallah. It's outside these regions that are called Area A, when life is normal, but in a way imprisoned, right?
Yeah, but it's also around Ramallah. When we speak about the violence and terrorism of the settlers, they are in the small villages around Ramallah. It's not far away. We are speaking about a very tiny, small piece of land.
So look around, Rula. Maybe we can explain it there. This is the West Bank, basically. And then there's Jerusalem. We later on show the Jerusalem where the spike is in the in the territory of Palestine, and the red dots are the settlements. And Ramallah is like 20 kilometers north of Jerusalem. So you see how the territory of a potential Palestine state is divided by the building of the settlements.
Exactly.
And this is where the conflicts are.
No, the conflict didn't start with the settlement. The conflict started a little bit back in the history, 47, 48, with the establishment of the State of Israel. Okay,
yes.
Without the acceptance of the
about
Arabs and the Palestinians, but we are not going to go back.
Yes, this is a path I'd like not to go tonight, because if we start about the history, then we won't find a solution. This is, I think, one of the problems. I talked about this Antigone play of Sophocles. You will not find the one solution when you try to figure out who did when what, and you know that a lot
Absolutely.
of most of the Holocaust survivors were the founders, or the founders of Israel were Holocaust survivors. So this is a difficult and I would say dangerous road, but the future, or maybe the present, is interesting. This would be my approach, not to find solutions in the past, because it's so, I mean, there was injustice and violence like all the time, and this might also be interesting to do research there, but I think finding the strength, and this is what I find fascinating in your approach, is in a way look in the future and talk about a potential, maybe now vision, but maybe it's perspective at least for the people. So
absolutely, I agree. I will say only one sentence about history. History is important, but history should not be an obstacle to think about solutions. We are not going to agree about how we understand the history, Palestinians and Israelis, and it's fine. We have two stories, two narratives. We do not need to agree about that, but we need to agree about how we understand the present and how can we think about a shared future. And by saying that, I don't underestimate the collective memory and history of the Jewish people before the establishment of the State of Israel. So it's to be very clear. The situation on the ground now that we have between the Jordan and the sea, two groups of people. And these two people claim their belonging to this place, Israel, Palestine. And we need to find a way how to continue living there despite this Swiss cheese map that we have when it comes to think about the old paradigm of the classic two-state solution that speaks about, a clear border between Israel and Palestine.
So, but this is a political statement and saying we have to live together it sounds like the normal thing to do, but it's not, because there are voices, of course, as you know, from the river through the sea is said by both sides, meaning pushing the other people out. In a way, this is, I would say, not possible. It's ridiculous, or only it means could be done by horrible violence.
Yeah.
But saying we have to live together is kind of a radical statement. The normal thing to say is, for me, it sounds like, okay, and then the question is how?
For me also, and I say always, even we don't need to love each other and to like each other and to forgive also about the mutual atrocities and who did much more violence and atrocities to the other. The fact is that we have two people that want to continue living there, and we need to find a solution. It's not going to be easy. We already know that. It's going to be a long way. But we are trying actually to find a concept and a path. How can we, first of all, improve the classic approach of the two states that still the main concept that is agreed in the international community, but also among the majority of the Israeli Jews and the Palestinians. Among the Palestinians on the ground in Palestine, I acknowledge that there is a gap between the Palestinians there in Palestine and the Palestinians in the diaspora who are speaking, or when they think about Palestine from the Jordan to the sea, they speak about something different. I'm willing as a Palestinian, and I know that Dahlia is also willing to share this place between the Israeli Jews and the Palestinians. And we have actually developed this concept of still speaking about two states, two political entities, because both people still in this national mindset where they want their state, their national symbols, and so on. But meanwhile, the reality on the ground is not speaking about the segregation and separation that is in the center of the classic two-state solution.
So, Dahlia, what is the solution? After accepting, the structured solution. I mean, like, this is not like it's going to be there tomorrow and there will be no public vote about the two-state solution or confederation in the next month.
Yeah.
But what is the potential solution?
I mean, this starts with the realization that we have been in negotiations, the two sides, for 25 years. I mean, not for the last over 10 years, for two states based on a partition. And all of those negotiations have failed. So as Rula said, this is an approach that A Land for All has developed that starts with the premise that the two sides need self-determination. So we are talking about two states, separate governments, separate presidency, separate legislature. There is a border between them, but it is a border that is transformed into one of collective restrictions for one side, right, which is the way we are today, really, without really any border in a way, to a border that is developed in order to facilitate freedom of movement, eventually, maybe gradually, for law-abiding citizens of either state. They exist in a kind of cooperative relationship, something like a confederation, which these terms can be, misunderstood, but it's basically two states that willingly agree to share some of their sovereign powers, such as the border, in order to allow the facilitation of people so that they can move to all the parts of the land where everybody feels they belong, but they will only have citizenship in their countries of their nationality. They will have permanent residency if they are living on the other side, which means they have the rights and the protections of citizens, but they would only vote in their national parliaments in the state of their nationality. To Europeans, this probably sounds pretty natural because people can move and live somewhere else, but they vote in their countries. And it is premised on the idea, first I should back up that the idea is premised on national equality between the two sides. So there's equality of individuals, but also equality between the two nations. So they share their powers over the border regime. They share citizenship because people can live on the other side as residents, which means the two sides have to guarantee safety, security of the minorities on the other side. They will share Jerusalem as the capital, as opposed to trying to draw a line and divide a city, right? Again, I don't have to explain to this audience why we don't need another divided city in the world. And when we see the map of Jerusalem, which maybe we can show it.
We need this one later. But,
okay, we'll show it after.
No, let's
okay.
Jerusalem's coming.
I think when we talk about...
And this looks like complicated. If you expect now like a postcard of Jerusalem, it's not.
But it's important to show it because for so long we thought that a two-state solution would work if we just split Jerusalem in half. But if you can see from the map here, you have West Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is not really east. It's north, east, and south all the way around the west. And all the blue areas in what is called East Jerusalem, inaccurately, are actually Israeli neighborhoods at this point. So they are completely intertwined. You can't actually separate it down the middle. What you need is a capital for Israel in Jerusalem, which already exists,
and the green areas are Palestine cities or neighborhoods, right?
Right, yes, exactly.
So you see how complicated it is. And from a formal perspective, all the blue dots, the settlements, are illegal.
Right.
These are illegal built settlements in the Palestine territories or in Palestine. But when you are there, maybe some of you had been there, these are cities. So settlements sounds for Germans like some tents and people sleeping under the stars.
No,
this is not. These are
intertwined.
completely functioning like big cities. So it's hard to imagine that they will vanish or go away.
Not only won't they vanish, but if you try to split Jerusalem, the population that will suffer the fastest and the most are the Palestinians who live in Jerusalem. They will get cut off from social services. They will not have access, which they currently have now, to move around Israel. So we have a different paradigm where Jerusalem remains an open, shared city. A capital of Israel already exists there. Palestinians can establish a capital in the eastern or one of the other parts of the city. And the city is not restricted. And the two sides, the two states, have some limited institutions for managing common interests, whether it's economic policy, security, which we began to talk about. And we know that it's possible because the two sides have been cooperating on security for 30 years in a situation of inequality, which in a long-term vision should be a situation of equality. And then the partnership on security is to serve all the populations rather than controlling the Palestinians. And of course, they would share capabilities on things like environment, climate, water, resources, public health, where two societies living so close together in a very small piece of land actually have to cooperate anyway. The question is whether they cooperate through built-in mechanisms of two sides that have agreed to share their sovereign powers. But the most important thing, I think, is that this opens up a mechanism, a policy, for how to address the most difficult parts of the conflict. And apropos the discussion about the past, we're not going to relitigate the past. But as somebody who has been advising politicians during previous rounds of negotiations a long time ago now, it has become extremely clear to me that you will never resolve this conflict without addressing and giving some sense of justice, however imperfect it will always be, to what happened in the past. And I think I learned over years of working on either advising politicians for negotiations, doing public opinion research, or working with NGOs on both sides, the peace activists, that you can't just hope it goes away. And so the very, very policy-specific mechanism of allowing people to live as residents, if they are law-abiding and respect the sovereignty of the other side, that opens up a way of saying settlers, if they respect Palestinian sovereignty and law, can live in Palestine, not as Israel-controlled enclaves, which, steal land and resources, or have a kind of Israeli army presence, but as individuals with an acknowledged connection to that land. And it means Palestinians who have their roots and their ancestry and history in what is now sovereign Israel can live in Israel as residents if they are law-abiding and respect Israeli sovereignty. And that opens up probably the only mechanism I've ever encountered that can address the past without threatening basically the majority on each side who reflect their national identity.
Rula, can I phrase it like this? And please correct me if I've summarized it the wrong way. There's a very, I would say, visional and progressive and far-reaching approach. What you described, Dahlia, sounds like the European Union between Israel and Palestine in a way. Different countries, but open borders, people moving away and building up at least some common infrastructure, water, energy, environment. This is what we're doing with the French and with the Danes and what Czech Republic and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, very pragmatic, and maybe this radical pragmatism is the clue solving the most problematic issue, talking about a two-state solution or potential peace in the region. The settlements can stay there, but the settlers will become Palestinian citizens. Right? Is that understood? Right? Is it right? So
no, I agree with you with your understanding that it's similar to the EU. And by the way, it's not a very new idea. Even the partition plan between Israel and Palestine from 1947 speaks about two states with economic cooperation.
An economic union.
Economic union, even, yeah. So. And even in the Zionist ideology,
coming
there is
from the status quo, it sounds like when I said it is radical to talk about a land for all, like shared, not a mix, but a shared country. This is even more radical. I can't really imagine with the situation I experienced how this should work with all the hatred and the political tensions in the region right now. So I think there's a vision in it. But the other point is very pragmatic, very like, surprisingly. So hearing from you, and both, I mean, it's very simple, the answer, but I think there are something like 700,000 settlers now in the Palestinian territories.
Including Jerusalem.
Yeah, exactly.
So like
500,000.
And I told you, these cities, you see them there, Armin and others, they are really, I mean, they look a little bit like fortress because they're always on the top of the mountains, and the Palestinian people were more in the valleys. So, but it looks like defending the country. You see it, and you see, okay, there's some form of architectural aggression in it. I would say, and then you're saying, okay, but they are there. We have to live with the situation as it is.
No.
Then
it's not
correct
accurate.
me.
No. First of all, the settlements are illegal according to the international law and according to even some Israeli laws. The settlers and the settlement are part of a very violent, aggressive project of stealing the land of the Palestinian people. This needs to be clear. And our solution for them is not so simple as it might sound. Having said that, they are not legal, and that this is part of a wider ideological, aggressive approach. We offer them many options. First of all, any agreement about the settlers and the settlements under this, let's say, new two states solution or two states in a confederative model, what we are approaching for, need to be agreed between the Palestinians and the Israeli side. Those settlers who are accused for violence and terrorism, they won't be offered anything. The settlers who are willing to be part of this solution and to understand that they won't be able, under this solution, to keep their privileges as settlers, they are welcome to stay in the state of Palestine, under the Palestinian sovereignty, and they will get Palestinian residency. They will continue to be citizens in the state of Israel. And those who are not willing to accept the new situation, they are free, and I will encourage the majority of them to go back to Israel.
This is then like a mirror for what is happening now in Israel. You are a Palestinian woman born in Israel. I don't know if it was born here, I guess.
Yeah.
So there are 20% of the Israeli population, roughly 20%, are Palestinians. And they have citizenship. I wouldn't say they don't serve in the army, so it's not they are fully integrated. But well, you have an Israeli passport, and this would be like the same offering to the settlements in a state of Palestine.
I don't like this comparison, but yes, because we cannot compare the settlers with the Palestinian citizens in Israel, like me. And I won't even, when we speak about solving these deadlocks of the classic two-state solution that Dahlia started speaking about, Jerusalem, the settlers, we have another major deadlock. And I don't like to make the comparison between these deadlocks and with the settler issue. And the last deadlock is actually the Palestinian refugees and the right of return. But yes, beyond the comparison, they will be able, if they want to give up their terrorism and violence, and they have to, they are welcome to stay as residents in the state of Palestine and continue to be Israeli citizens. And there's another point that we emphasize when we speak about the settlers, speaking about justice or semi-justice. Those lands where the settlements are built, and because not all of them are going to be demolished or are going to stay there, we need also to speak about a mechanism of reparations and compensations for the Palestinian people.
Before we go there, maybe I can and Dahlia, you correct me if I say something wrong, describe what this would demand from the settlers movement and from Israel. Maybe back to the map you filed to us. We see the green, the area where the Palestinian people live, and then the blue settlements. Right in the north, in the top, there's Ramallah written. So you see there's an axis basically around Jerusalem from Ramallah to Bethlehem, and this is the home of the Palestinian people. And they traveled freely, I would say so, in their own territory. Now, the settlements are interrupting this free movement. And I heard two explanations why the settlements are there, maybe three. The first one is we need land, and Jerusalem is too expensive, and young families move out, and they just take it, which is illegal, but they want land. The second is that there's a strategic idea, maybe also a security military idea, to defend Jerusalem to the east. And when you see this big area, E1, this is the main topic now, debated and heated debated in Jerusalem. If this is the claim to build there another big settlement, which completely would cut off Ramallah from Bethlehem and intercept these areas, so make it impossible for the Palestinian people to move freely and build maybe some small hometowns in a way, or let them stay there, but they can't have their territory on their own. And the third reason is, I think, what's happening in the West Bank and in the Jordan Valley to push all Palestinian people out of the region, because this is so there are the old settlements as we see there, and what's happening now on the West Bank, what I was briefly talking about in the very beginning, is that the young settlers, the radical religious settlers are going in the valleys, and this is not about finding cheap land because they are poor people. This is just sheer injustice. They are building their settlements, only small homes, directly to the places where the Palestinian shepherds are. So there's a small village, and there's huge space. So they could, in theory, it is injustice. Everywhere they could build a home, but they do it like 200 meters away from the Palestinian shepherds, and then they build a fence only 20 meters away from the Palestinian shepherds and say, when your sheep are entering my territory now, then these are my sheep. And then they do every horrible things like cutting off the food resources, destroying the solar panels and whatever, and pushing the sheep over the fence, calling the army, and the army is always taking side for the settlers. So when the Palestinian shepherd is trying to survive the situation, he will be arrested and his family would be also pushed out. So it's really, really horrible. So there are, in a way, three strategies for the settlements. How would this solution, as Rula described, offering them first accept you heard it, describe the situation, but in the end they could stay. What would that mean for these kind of ideology?
Yeah. Well, first of all, remember that you're talking about some of the most extreme people in the settler movement. We have to realize that not just as Israelis are not monolithic, Palestinians are not monolithic, even settlers are not monolithic. They are, I think, all ideological to varying degrees. What you're talking about are the most radical and extreme, and by the way, they don't just cut water lines, they will sometimes just kill the sheep for poor farmers in Jordan Valley. Now, my feeling about this is that you will never get rid of all the spoilers. There are people in the region who do not want to achieve a peaceful solution based on democratic principles. They are currently in the Israeli government. The Israeli government, the current government, is the most explicit government in the history of the country in saying exactly what it wants to do. And the number one reason for all of the developments that you pointed out, the government will be the first to tell you, and the ministers will tell you, they say it every day, we are preventing a Palestinian state. So this is an extremist crowd and an extremist government. But we're trying to build a vision that says we will reflect what we think the biggest number of people can benefit from. And we can't tailor a democratic solution based on the far extreme undemocratic margins. So there's no great solution for people who break the law. If you are ever going to be able to implement this kind of a solution, first of all, it will not be with this government, because this government has as its number one policy to prevent ever having a Palestinian state. They don't believe in the Palestinian people. Self-determination is not their priority, and frankly, democracy is not their priority for Israel. So we're talking about a different government, if there ever is one, and hopefully, I think, a lot of international involvement that pushes the two sides towards this.
We start tonight.
Thank you. We've been waiting. But the point is, the idea is that the rest of the settlers who at least will have a choice as to how to live their lives if they are willing to respect the sovereignty and law of the other side. As individuals, they can live, and it's understood that they have a right to be in all parts of the land, just as Palestinians have a right to be in all parts of the land, where their political self-determination happens within their state. Now, this is not an easy thing to implement. Some of the settlement communities will remain settlement communities, but they will have to have a transition where when Rula said they give up their privilege, what that means is that Palestinians should have all the same kinds of infrastructure, water, electricity, development, control over their urban and non-urban development life that the Israelis have. It doesn't have to mean necessarily a deterioration of their status. What it means is that our vision is that the two sides become increasingly equal. And that will be a long and difficult process because they're starting at such an enormous gap economically, infrastructurally, and in terms of the kinds of technical things like control over how to plan your towns and communities and cities, which Palestinians simply don't have that. So the communities that stay are those that agree that they will retain their Israeli citizenship and live as a protected minority in which they have citizenship in Israel, but they are residents of Palestine, and they will have to work within Palestinian law. Now, most settlers will not like this. And I think we need to acknowledge that this is not a win-win situation. It's lose-lose in a good way. In other words, everybody's going to have to give up some very serious things. And for the settlers, they're giving up what they believe is the right to Israeli sovereignty in that area, which they cannot have. But what they get is that Israeli society and Palestinian society does not blame only them for everything in the conflict, when in fact it was the Israeli state itself backing the settler project from the very beginning and up to the present. The state has been behind it, the people have voted for the governments, and all of Israeli society has to have that responsibility. So the settlers don't get what they want, which is Israeli sovereignty over enclaves, or actually over the whole thing. The settlers who remain will not be backed by the Israeli army in the middle of the Palestinian state. They will have to come to terms with some sort of security cooperation in order to protect that minority, just the way we have security cooperation today, but fundamentally in a situation that is moving towards political and every other kind of equality. And so, you know, it's a more realistic solution only because it doesn't depend on this fantastical idea that 700,000 people are going to get up and move, which they will never. And most of Israeli society, the vast majority, will never support that. And so, you know, I think one of the questions we get, I just want to make a point about the two-state solution. People say, well, what's wrong with the two-state solution with a hard wall and a hard partition? And the only legitimate concern I think we all need to understand is security, right? Israelis are rightfully concerned about security. I'm concerned about security. Frankly, Palestinians are concerned about security, considering how many more Palestinians have died in the last 15 years of war. But the way to security, I don't understand the justification for saying that if you break up Palestinian lands and make it impossible for them to move from town to town and isolate them into choked off cities like Ramallah, which literally was a caged-in city for parts of 2024, I'm not sure how that brings security. And after October 7th, I am sure it does not bring security because Gaza was the most isolated and controlled part of land between the river and the sea. And the worst thing that ever happened to this region was what came out of Gaza. And I just don't even understand the logic anymore. I think when you give people the option for mobility on the condition that they are abiding by the law, not committing violence or crimes, you give them opportunity, you give them opportunities for education, for touring, for work. You recognize that they have a right to access the ancestral lands, and you have more organic forms of cooperation, and you actually give them something that we're almost afraid to ever say, but a kind of optimism, right? They're not locked in and only ever hearing themselves in their own communities, like Israelis are only ever hearing Israel's side of the matter, which is why they don't have a lot of empathy for Palestinians. And I dare say that's pretty mutual.
So we heard, and I think everyone has a feeling, maybe also some knowledge, something about Israeli politics and the government and Netanyahu and even the worst like Smotrich and Ben Gvir. But the Palestine side that would be part of your suggested trade-off, would have to give up the claim that all Israelis move back from the areas. You described it very well, how there's a different step approach, but in the end, it could be the outcome that some settlements with Israelis living there. Is someone in Palestine, on the political side, the leadership, is debating things like this? Because I always had the feeling, I met the Palestinian authorities in my time in office also, like many times, every time I was in Israel, and nobody came up with an idea like this. They also talked about separation and injustice, of course, but something, in a way it was, I wouldn't compare it, you hate the comparison, but I guess my question is, are the Palestinian people well represented by the PA?
No, of course not. And I'm not saying something new to you and to the public here this evening. We know that the PA lacks credibility because of the lack of elections in Palestine. The last election that we had was 2006. So it's not a normal situation. But I think the major disaster that we have now, Israelis and Palestinians, that we don't have the political leaders that are brave enough on both sides to adopt this political vision. And we are not dreamers, and we can see it actually. The way that we learn about the history of Europe and the European Union, we can imagine also having this in Israel, Palestine. And we had also phases where optimism was actually much present there, where we had a kind of freedom of movement until the first Intifada, 87. We didn't have all of these checkpoints, and so we forget. And we are not thinking about this solution because we are nice and kind and clever. No,
We're not.
No.
You're nice and kind and clever.
We are not.
You're not?
Because it's not the main thing. It's because we really believe against the main idea that I hear it in Israel, in Palestine, and even in the world, this conflict is unsolvable. I cannot accept that. Because we know that conflicts in the history, in the world, have been solved or were solved in many ways. Yeah, and we know also that this conflict needs to be solved. We know that it's going to be hard. It's going to be complicated. We don't have now the leaders on both sides that are brave enough to do it. But we don't have the privilege not to continue doing that, because the reality on the ground is a reality of an apartheid state. The situation is very bad, especially since October 7th, and not only because of October 7th, because of the massive killing of Palestinians, and because of this fanatic government in Israel that might initiate another cycle of violence in Gaza and in the West Bank in each moment. Now.
So in a way, Europe is a good example, because now we have a union after hundreds, maybe thousands of years, where at least the Germans and the French were always fighting, killing each other. They were like the Erbfeind, it's called, like I had hatred. And now maybe we don't like each other because of when you play football or handball against each other, but in a way we consider ourselves as Europeans. And in one union, unthinkable 70 years ago, where we only were used to kill and shoot each other. So you're right, but also now learning the lessons from the European Union, and nothing is compared with your situation. The obstacle is always in politics that someone has something to lose. So if you want to go the next step, someone has to explain that he's breaking up with his or her party line, what the people voted for, what he thinks or she thinks was sent to the European Union. So this is why progress is so hard to make. And I mean, this is also could be an explanation, at least for the people running your country, that if it's true what you say, that nobody likes them in a way, something new would mean that they will lose power. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, I think that the ones now who are in charge of power benefit from the status quo, as bad as it is, because they're not sent to court or maybe to prison. They have, I don't know if it's luxury, but they have a decent rise. At least they have Ramallah. So why should give up Ramallah for the sake of a better of all the people when this means I'm out of office, I'm out of the access I have to power? Is this the problem?
And Hamas had the Gaza Strip before October 7th.
The Gaza Strip, yeah.
And this is one of the...
It still has, in a way. So, right. So,
yeah.
How to overcome the situation? And maybe if I can ask the question, what would you think of Europeans and Germans, what we should say or what we should do? Because I think there is a shyness in a way, at least from myself, I can say that, not to blame others, lecturing people about a conflict like this, going to Israel and say, you should do this or that, as a German, is really inappropriate. It felt so hard to say. And the same for Palestine, of course. So, but you can demand something from us.
Yeah, of course, I demand it all the time, especially in the last 2 years. But I have to be honest, with all of my respect, I'm not sure that we can expect much from Europe and from the international community. I think Europe has its own problems under the new world order that Trump is imposing on all of us, not only on Europeans. And it seems that those who have the power to decide are not really in Europe. I do want to continue believe on the power of Europe to implement any pressure or to play a bigger role when it comes to Israel, Palestine, and maybe much more widely in the Middle East. But unfortunately, what happened during the last couple of months, especially the President Trump plan for Gaza, and it's not only a plan for Gaza, it's a plan for the Palestinian people and for Palestine, pushed back the efforts that were led by major European countries in recognizing the state of Palestine, even speaking about a kind of sanctions against Israel. So unfortunately, the world order that we are now living in is quite different. I do want to say another 2 words. The major problem is actually not in Ramallah. And I'm not saying that because I'm Palestinian. I have plenty of critics on the Palestinian leadership at the PA and Hamas. Hamas doesn't represent me. What they did in October 7th, what was not only brutal and not moral and not ethical, but also in political interests for the Palestinian people was actually very negative. But I do believe that in the last at least 20 years, the problem is much more in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv than in Ramallah. Netanyahu did everything in order to strengthen Hamas because he didn't want to face and to cooperate with the Palestinian Authority, because the Palestinian Authority is still supporting the approach of the two-state solution.
Stands for the idea of a Palestine state, yeah.
Yeah. So
I think this is known to at least the ones who have read a little bit about it, that the Netanyahu government was...
Meanwhile, I do want to emphasize that the situation on the ground is continue to be very bad, and the last decisions of the Israeli government mean actually, first of all, destroying and putting or shooting the last
The last shot.
the last shot on the Oslo Agreement, and annexing de facto and not only de jure the West Bank. And I'm not speaking about Gaza. The situation is still very, very bad, and we are not going to manage to change the situation on the ground without two things: political leaders and major change in Israel-Palestine, especially in Israel, and support from outside. So I still want the support from outside, and I don't need to tell any diplomat what are the kinds of support or pressure that they can practice in order to bring the Palestinian people and the Israelis to a different situation.
So Rula's right. You can't discuss the Israel-Palestine situation without a clear view on what's happening outside in the world. And Trump is like, I mean, he has a reputation, I think, in Israel due to the freeing of the hostages, I have to say. But
Israelis love him.
Huh?
They loved him from his first term, and they love him now.
Yeah. So, but still, this is unsatisfying, leaving the stage without any kind of call for action in a way. So we have your initiative, but still you believe in it. From your point of view, what can Europe or should Europe or Germany do or say or act?
Well, I think for one thing, Germany and Europe as a whole need to realize that part of the reason why there has been such stagnation of the peace process for all these years, last time there was any sort of round of negotiations under American auspices was 2013 and 14. Nothing since then. And that's because the entire world, Europe included, deprioritized it, said, it can't be solved. And I understand, okay, but it turned out to be a big mistake. And not only was it a big mistake to kind of, give up and say, well, this can't be priority because it can't be solved, but it was also a big mistake for the credibility of Europe's own policy, because all of these European countries, Germany included, officially support a two-state solution and have been unable to implement their own policies, whatever that translates to on the ground. And I think that something that I want to give credit to a colleague of mine at my think tank, it's an American think tank, who wrote a good paper. It's on the website of the Century Foundation, Century International, who made a point that we all know, but she really spelled it out, which is that all of the attempts to target settlement businesses, settlement, the Project 2000 or whatever, Horizon, I mean, it makes sense in our minds because we try to distinguish occupation and illegal settlements, but ultimately it is the Israeli state, it is the government doing these things. It has always been the Israeli state basically backing them. And so I think you need to rethink, A, how to implement your own policy, right? Because that gap between what is said and what happens in practice is damaging in itself for Europe's credibility. And this cannot be deprioritized, as difficult as it is to make any progress. And it has to be understood as a problem of the Israeli state. Now, does that mean boycott? Actually, probably not, because boycotts tend to be not very effective. But those have to be the guidelines for the policy. And then the final thing I would say, what I mean by guidelines is the three things that I just said, and how that gets translated into what it means to work with the Israeli state to implement your policy. We have to rethink what it would mean. It's hard for me to say. But I also think that the only way this is really ever going to change, before October 7th, I used to say, well, the outsiders should support a peace process and outside countries should pressure us to get back to the negotiating table, but ultimately they can't want it more than the parties themselves, because that's what everybody in Washington said, right? Everybody in Washington who worked on the Oslo Accords would say, we can't want it more than the parties themselves. And I kind of agreed. I thought Israeli politicians, we have to elect different leaders, and Palestinians have to have a more unified leadership and effective. And we just have to wait for that. And now, after October 7th, I think that there is no point in waiting for that. The international community has to be much more active as a whole. I don't think Europe can do it alone. But I think that any real change in this region will require what I consider, or I've been calling, a perfect storm. It will have to be an American leadership that is really willing to move towards something like a final status resolution, together with Arab states, together with Europe, all on board. And finally, the recognition that, yes, conflicts have been solved. And, Israelis love to say, sure, your plan sounds good if this was Europe, but, it's not Europe. And I say, well, yeah, but Europe once wasn't Europe. I mean, there was terrible wars here. But we have to acknowledge that no solution is going to be the perfect solution. There is no such thing as a perfect solution. Nobody should be promising a perfect solution, because it's another way of saying, I don't want any solution. And once the international community, basically those three main actors, I think, the United States, if it happens under Trump, if he does one good thing, let it be this. But it has to be backed. I mean, he will not do it unless there's mutual interests with the Arab states, because everything for him is transactional, and Europe will have to get on board. And that maybe even, it's hard to say if there's an opportunity now, because the process underway is so,
So this is, of course, pure speculation what Trump really wants, but for sure he wants the Nobel Prize, the Peace Nobel Prize. So, and this is not really working well when you look deeper into what's happening in Gaza. Even to implement phase 2 is nobody is there to disarm Hamas.
But the reason why nobody's there...
It's a dead end already I would say.
It's not a dead end. The reason nobody's there is because nobody's willing to name the final status. If you look at every international intervention, including those that are close to European soil like Kosovo, they had, whether they said it or not, everybody really knew where it was going. And if you don't have a final political aim, this is what happened. I've spoken to everybody I can speak to who has been involved in international interventions, understands what it is to create, provisional territory under international auspices. They don't work unless there is a vision for where they're going.
So coming back to what one could do, and now leave Trump out, nobody knows if he would be re-elected, there would be fair and free elections at all, or if he is he's over in, I don't know, in 3 years' time, maybe earlier. And there's an impeachment after the midterm election. So everything is possible. But this does not mean that we have now to define our next steps, or you, by Trump. Two things I have to question, or I have to ask you. First, talking about the European Union. It was not implemented as a political entity. They started with economic issues. Exactly. And energy and steel and coal that time was at the heart of it. So using this as a blueprint or as an example, you could maybe start with concrete cooperation in infrastructure. Before you say we have a parliament or a confederation, you figure out where you really can achieve something on the ground. And this brings Europe in, because there is so much money going from Europe to the region, or was. And Europe has, of course, what it has is economic influence and power. Also to Israel. We are a strong trade partner. The European country, the European Union is a strong trade partner with Israel. If they would use this strength for infrastructure development or the demand of it, at least there's leverage, I would say, and it's hard to break it. And there's even more, how close our military and defense industry are intertwined. So, of course, you can think about a role of Europe, if Europe is willing to play, which demands that Europe has to know the match plan in a way, knows what they want to. And this brings me to the maybe concrete question, but no one of these guys, including me, is Minister for Defense and Economic Affairs anymore, at least me. But access to the public. I mean, you came from Munich. Have you ever debated a land for all with political leaders? Is it a civil society movement? Wouldn't be that a demand that next round would be with, I don't know, Ursula von der Leyen or Kaja Kallas or whoever has a say in the thing, that they have to at least listen to you, and then it's up to them to decide to do better, maybe even so, but bring it out of the sphere of public talk to political debate?
They listen and they know, and I met all of them, and I met much more other people. In Europe, in the States, and in the region, not only me, all of us that involved in this initiative. And we get a lot of support and attraction and understanding also from a lot of politicians and decision makers that actually this might be the main solution that can work, because to keep saying the two-state solution, they know that it's not going to work. The way they wanted to implement it 30 years ago.
The old two-state solution,
exactly.
Like the Oslo solution. Yeah.
Exactly. And they understand that people need something new in Israel, Palestine, and that the reality on the ground also needs something new. But the problem is As you also mentioned in a way, let's wait and see how things are going to develop, or let's wait and see the results of the election in Israel. With this government, we cannot do anything. Let's have, first of all, democratic political reform in the PA. Let's disarm Hamas, and I'm fine with all of that, okay? And I even buy your suggestion to start like the EU, like building the EU gradually, under two conditions. And these conditions, I discussed them with all the diplomats and decision makers. First of all, we have to start from the end vision. We cannot repeat our mistakes. We cannot. And we cannot repeat also mistakes that we learned from other conflicts in the world. First of all, ending the occupation, recognizing the state of Palestine, and putting also meaning into this recognition. Not just to recognize the state of Palestine and keep it under occupation, and not only occupation, fragmentation between, geographically, especially between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And the second condition, we didn't claim ever that our political solution that we offer is going to implement it as a whole package at once. So I agree with you that we have to start it gradually, but under these two conditions: the end game, to start from it and to reverse engineer our steps. And the second condition is to have a timeline where, or for all the steps that we are going to reverse engineer to implement now for the medium term and the long term. Otherwise, we are going to repeat our mistakes.
And the timeline starts, I guess, with the election in your country, or could. So, as you say, you're not predicting, but you know everything.
No, I mean, I would not wait for any election to start with the kinds of things that you talked about. Now, in January 2024, I wrote an article or research paper really arguing why we need to have a shared public health committee. Because we have a public health crisis in Gaza, permanent. Israel already basically had largely destroyed the public health system. Germs do not know borders, as we all know. And this is, when you said radical pragmatism before, this should not be a radical argument, right? It is obvious we will need cooperation on what looks like a very small issue. But you know what? In 2020, it was not a small issue at all. And guess what? Israel and the Palestinians, including in Gaza, did manage to cooperate when it became a very big issue. Why should we do that at the last minute? We should start now, have permanent structures of cooperation over the less sensitive political areas, right? Because this shouldn't be so sensitive. There are precedents for it from the 1990s and the early 2000s where these people can cooperate professionally without being defensive about 1948, 1967 settler, We have to cooperate on these areas whether we like it or not. And so those should be the beginning steps that will explain, or without having to explain, that anybody who is involved in them and people who know about them realize this is how normal life works. And then when the politicians, sometime in the future, not really anytime soon, are going to be ready to move ahead politically, there will be more of an infrastructure on the ground to do it. There will be more lived experience of people working together, cooperating together, not because they feel good, but because they have to. I've started to call it needs-based interactions instead of what we did in the 1990s, and some of us are old enough to remember. Oslo, period, we call it the Oslo phase, where we had all this money that the international community gave to doing peace projects, and kids should get together and talk, and it was very nice, but there was no need for it. It just was nice if you felt like doing it. And so the people who felt like doing it were the ones who were already convinced. What we need is the people who are doing it because they have to, because they're professionally interdependent, because the communities are interdependent. And then people say to me, how can we have peace? There's no trust between the two sides. Trust isn't going to appear out of nowhere. And we have plenty of time before those good politicians come around. Okay, now, I'm not predicting what will happen in the next election. Really, I'm not. But I do know, because I'm an analyst of Israeli politics, that all of the top running political opposition in Israel does not support a two-state solution, or if they do, they're too afraid to say it. In fact, they probably really don't. Not
the only one who's saying
it
is Ben-Gvir in this, I don't know, in this funny politics of Israel, not so funny maybe. He's the most lefty of these important candidates.
No, we're talking about.
Sorry, Yair Golan.
Yair Golan.
So, and he's talking about separation.
Yeah.
When he says two-state solution, he means we have to.
He doesn't say two-state solution if he can help it.
Yeah.
He tries not to say it because he doesn't want to be branded as a leftish, And the other top-running politicians of the opposition, the ones who are more likely to win than Yair Golan, either they are pretty much against it, like Naftali Bennett, who is the highest-ranked politician in the opposition right now, or anybody around him in that same political space, like the center and the center-right. Those are the leaders. If the opposition wins, they will be the ones leading the next government, and they are not there. So it's up to, the reality is that it's up to the public, it's up to civil society, it's up to the international community to help. Don't wait for Israeli politicians. By the time, I would say on Palestinian side, what's most desperately needed is functional leadership with legitimacy. Don't wait for that either. It will have to happen, but it will take time. And, we've been burned by this. It takes time, it's incremental. Our plan is incremental. There's no way around it. None of what we've talked about can happen tomorrow. But it will be fundamentally different from the phases of Oslo that never happened because we want to know where we're going. And that's where we say, okay, we're not going to wait for the politicians. We will have a plan that is radically pragmatic, even though it's not really radical. And whenever they're ready, we will be there. We're not waiting for anybody to call us. We're trying to advocate for it as much as possible. But there are steps that can be done.
Or you become a politician yourself. Rula, ever thought about, overthrowing the PA and becoming the president of Palestine?
No, I even can't, according to the Palestinian law.
You can, according to A Land for All.
Yeah, I'm Israeli citizen for becoming the president of Palestine, and I really don't want that. I don't want to have a real political career. I think my ethical, moral.
Don't say it. You're sitting next to a former politician.
Doesn't fit the Israeli and the Palestinian political systems. I'm not speaking about Germany. So
okay, whoa. That was a smart move.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thanks for doing this tonight with us. Thanks for at least giving us some hope, some perspective, maybe a sense of feeling of how us could talk about the situation in your country. And I think everyone has understood and heard the wish for not speaking up. That was one negative sentence too much, I think. But helping you by saying the right things and not letting you down and not letting you alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Das spricht für Sie. Ich wollte eigentlich noch 2 Schlussworte auf Deutsch sagen und dann haben Sie die beiden so schön getragen. Vielen, vielen Dank dafür und ich halte es nur noch einmal für mich fest, dass der Nachmittag vielleicht gezeigt hat, wie man über eine komplizierte Situation reden kann und das liegt an tollen Menschen. Danke Dahlia, danke Rula, dass ihr zu uns gekommen seid. Ihnen allen guten Nachhauseweg und lassen wir Sie nicht alleine. Dankeschön.